All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. An odd time to see me, and an odd time for me to see all of you as well. Nice to see Marcus and Mr. Red Jack and Ruben. You're here too. Everybody who I thought would probably be tuning in is tuning in. It's going to be an interesting show today. I've got Chuck Costas on, and we're going to be talking about the Zeck exhibit. And I'm going to be showing you a video from a walkthrough and basically a guided tour of the exhibit by Chuck that he recorded yesterday. So let me bring Chuck into the stream here with me. Hey, Chuck, how you doing?
Hey everyone, great to be here again with you. This time, Bill, at least we're not talking about somebody else, but we're actually, I guess we are talking about Mike Zeck. But good to be sort of representing, the exhibit here and the things that I was able to assemble as part of my collection. So a little different for my being here too.
Right, and it's at the tail end of the exhibit, right? It ends this weekend.
It ends, I think, end of the month.
There's end of the month. Okay.
Yeah, there's an art walk going on today for the students. So those folks that are in Sarasota, Florida that want a great immersive art experience, come out here. You can see this exhibit plus a whole number of other galleries that are on exhibit here at Ringling College. It started at the end of last year. I think it was November of last year. I'd originally hoped to get out here, but given COVID and all, I'm here towards the end of the exhibit. So it's still great to see it live and in person, having sort of worked for months setting it up and seeing remote pictures of it. So it's great to experience it live.
Yeah, I think I'm confusing that with the Alex Ross exhibit that in Ohio here that ends this Sunday. But yeah, so tell me a bit about how this exhibit took form. I mean, was it Ringling that approached you, or was it something that you approached them about?
Yeah, it was, and from time to time, different entities will approach Mike Zeck actually directly, and so Mike, as many people probably know, Mike never kept any of his artwork. So whenever a institution like Ringling wants to do an exhibit, the first person that Mike calls is me, since I'm holding the majority of artwork, I guess, that's associated with Mike. So I was more than happy to talk with the folks at Ringling. For those who don't know, Ringling was the college that Mike went to for art school, and is still continuing today to focus on bringing new artists out into the community. Yesterday I met a gentleman that was working on the Garfield strip, and so I think there's a lot of cartoonists, but also just graphic designers get their start here at Ringling. And so the exhibit is set up for the students, but also for the public as well, for them to get different experiences and to see different points of view as it relates to what they could do with their career. And Mike is a fine example of somebody that moved on into the comic book realm.
Well, that's great. So, Ringling has always had a fantastic reputation. It was one of the schools that I looked into when I wanted to go to art school, and a little bit out of my reach financially, but was always, one of the top schools out there. So that's great that Zeck graduated from it, and that they wanted to, kind of show the kids where a career path that many art schools probably wouldn't focus too much on. I mean, I wanted to be an illustrator, but when at the school that I went to focused more on fine arts. So within the first year, I had forgotten about wanting to be an illustrator and was worried about how oil paints dry and things of that nature. So I think it's great that Ringling is doing this.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different interests that you can have, especially nowadays, where you could move into sort of computer animation, you can move into video production, you can move into television shows. All those are creative outlets for a lot of folks that have that desire to get into, producing and sort of doing things that impact, in pop culture. So I think there's a lot of different avenues to explore at Ringling, which is great. But it's also great that they remember things like comic book artwork that, and I think what we show here, especially for the students, is probably, it's hard to believe, but it's sort of the old way that things used to be done, where a lot of comics today are produced digitally. This really shows the old school methods for, the way that comics were produced, but also sort of leading into today's world of digital comics.
Sure. And what have you gotten any feedback from the museum or the exhibition as far as the feedback from the students or anything like that?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about who's coming out to the exhibit, and they said that the people that get the most excited are folks that are frankly around our age, probably in their 40s or 50s,
sure.
that are using the exhibit to sort of relive sort of their days when they used to buy comics off the rack. And the number one conversation point is around the comic book shops that they used to go to buy the comics when they see that. Because not only do we have the original artwork here, but I also wanted to actually put some of the comics on display so that people could see them in the final printed form. And I think that stimulates a lot of conversation. It was interesting. Yesterday we had a student that was homeschooled, and his mother brought him in here for a lesson on what it takes to produce a comic book, and it was great to be able to interact with him, just to sort of give him some additional schooling on the way that comic books are made. So I think they've been very pleased with it. I think they want to do more on comic books. We had some conversations about what might come next, but I think they used to do they had done a Jack Davis exhibit here a number of years ago, and that was very successful. And so this follow-up with the Mike Zeck exhibit, I think, is tapped into, I wouldn't say a more recent, and from a timing perspective, and with the Secret Wars 8 sale that recently happened, it couldn't be more timely to put a focus on somebody like Mike Zeck. And we'll get a little bit into some of the pieces that are exhibited here, but we have some Secret Wars things that tie very much into that, and a lot of people are coming in wanting to see Secret Wars 8. We've got a copy of the comic book here. For those, not to ruin any surprises, I was not the person that purchased the Secret Wars 8 page there, and I do not.
That was going to be one of my first questions.
No, but I did talk to the fine folks at Heritage, and they will actually be providing the Ringling School with a copy of the original art, as close to as an artist edition sort of quality print of the artwork, so that they can keep it on display here at Ringling College for future generations to admire and hopefully inspire them as artists to ultimately be a $3 million artist like Mike Zeck is now.
Yeah, that was a pretty amazing sale. And before we continue on, to thank Chris, who did a super chat with us here, who said he's a huge Zeck fan. And,
great to hear that.
Yes, exactly. As is Chuck, as everybody knows.
Everybody knows me as a Mike Zeck guy, although I like to think of myself as more than the Mike Zeck guy, but I'm very happy to be able to talk to Mike Zeck today.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being the Zeck guy. So, so you want to show maybe the video clip might be a good point here. I think that I watched it a couple times. I think it's really informative. It was a fun way to do this, because I didn't think we were going to get to do a walkthrough with you on camera, and this is like the next best thing.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll give everybody sort of a view of the things that are here at the exhibit. We can get into questions people may have about it, but it gives you a good walkthrough of both Mike's career as well as the pieces here. So let's roll it.
All right, let me pull that up right now.
Welcome to the Mike Zeck exhibit here at Ringling College in Sarasota, Florida. Wanted to go through a number of the pieces that are here, starting from Mike's early career. And so what we have here is 3 pages from Mike's original portfolio. So back in the day, artists would take samples to different comic book companies. Sometimes they meet them at conventions or other things. And what the artist would do is actually put together a portfolio of different types and genres. Here, you see a 3-page sequence, which shows Mike's ability to tell a story, starting with the splash and then 2 panel pages. This is of the Submariner, one of the very first Marvel Comics characters. But in the rest of the portfolio were other things like westerns and sci-fi, just to show the range of that. And ultimately, that led to a job at Charlton Comics. And you can see some examples of his Charlton work here. Here at Charlton worked a little bit different than some of the other comic companies, where they would ask the artist in some cases to not only pencil, but also ink and sometimes color pieces. So here's an example of Mike's sort of fully colored watercolor pieces that would have been used as a cover, although this one ended up being unpublished. But you can see some of the pages as well. This is kind of a bit of a Conan ripoff here that he also had in one of the issues there. But he spent a number of years in his early days at Charlton, but then moved on to Marvel Comics. And so Mike's first work at Marvel Comics was actually a Thanos story that appeared in Logan's Run number 6. So those people that are Thanos fans out there, Mike was the first one to do that solo story. But then the first run he worked on was Master of Kung Fu, or Shang-Chi, who just made it into the Marvel movies as well. So here's a page from Master of Kung Fu, an early page here. And what I like about this page is it actually shows one of Mike's artists that he also admired, which is Frank Frazetta. So here, Black Jar Tar had actually, or Black Jack Tar, had bought some Frazetta pieces and wanted to put them up in his house. And this was actually started by Jim Craig, who was the previous artist. So Mike continued the story and actually had him put those up in there. But a great way that one artist can pay homage to another artist in the art that they're drawing for the series. After Master of Kung Fu, the next run that Mike worked on was Captain America. So he did a very famous run starting with issue 258. He had done a fill-in issue before that. but was on this for a number of years as well. This is a classic cover featuring the Red Skull and Captain America, but I think his most famous piece of Captain America artwork is this one right here, which is the Captain America Annual 8 cover. This is a version of the poster that was painted by Phil Zimmelman a few years later when they made a Marvel press poster out of it. But I think, if you had to think of the 1980s and a classic Marvel cover, this is pretty much it. It just shows the dynamic, I think everything about this, the detail, the ferocity, the challenge between the two characters really summed up what everything that everybody wanted in a comic book cover. And this is a nice large-size version of the cover. There is a smaller black and white version. The actual black and white art was used and blown up and then created an overlay here so that they could actually paint the airbrush painting underneath this one. So great piece of my collection here. And we'll end over here, which is some other Captain America art here. One of the last stories that Mike did was this classic Deathlock story, and I always love this, of showing Deathlock, because he really brought this character back to life after the original Rich Buckler series. But we also see some of the process that Mike worked on. This was actually a Marvel Masterpiece series card for the second series, featuring the Red Skull, which was the classic nemesis of Captain America. But you can see Mike's original pencils here, and then he would work with Phil Zimmerman, who is an airbrush artist that he met here in Florida. And those two work together, not starting with the Punisher Limited series, but on a number of pieces through the years. And I think it's interesting to see their process and the difference between Mike's original pencils and the way that it ultimately ended up. But Mike would keep it in the original pencil form so that Phil could see all the shading and tones that he wanted in the final painting here. So great to be able to see those two together. And there's another example here that was done for the 50th anniversary of Captain America, this great Captain America poster. So Mike was also known as one of the great cover artists of the 1980s, when he was asked to work on a number of different projects here and there. This is a series of 3 X-Men Classic covers. These were covers that were used to reprint the Neil Adams series that Neil had done back in the late 60s with Tom Palmer. And for this, they actually brought Tom Palmer back as the inker for this. And so it's an interesting combination of Zeck and Palmer that worked on each of these. But here you see the double-sized or the wraparound covers that give the artist a little bit more work, room to work on this. And so you can see some great details in this, from a jungle scene to these mechanical sentinels that are in here. But some great examples, and you'll find other covers from Defenders and a whole number of other titles that Mike worked on here and there in the 1980s. So the first big project I think everybody remembers Mike for was Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. This is a project with Jim Shooter, who is the editor-in-chief, was also the writer. And so Jim worked very heavily with Mike on the look and feel of this. And it was very difficult because it was the first time they actually brought together all the heroes and villains, and they actually tied it in with a toy line, so they had to put all these different vehicles and other things into it. So I think what you'll notice is very specific about Secret Wars art is the corrections that are there, because Jim would architect a number of different changes. And so I think we can see a couple of those here by comparing this, which is the original double-page spread for pages 2 and 3, to this, which is the corrected version that ultimately appeared in print. So one thing I'll start by pointing out is Ariel, who was one of the X-Men at the time, they decided to actually leave her back on Earth and not put her in the series. And so when they actually went to go do the final publication, they replaced that image with the Wasp. And you'll see that she was originally down here as a little character, and they blew her up there, and they whited her out in the final version. So if you actually compare these, you'll find a number of differences, and you'll see a lot of that in Secret Wars art itself. But we have all the pages from Secret Wars 1 here on display. There are more changes that you're going to see throughout, and some of those weren't even done by Mike. So for instance here, the Molecule Man's face, this was a paste over, most likely by John Romita Sr., who was also working in the bullpen at the time and making corrections. But this is the first time that we've ever displayed the entire issue for people to read, and if you come out here, you can read the entire issue from the original art. It's also in the artist edition that we did. And then this is one of the classic covers of Doom sort of taking on the power of the Beyonder. I think everybody remembers this, where John Beatty, who was the inker for the majority of the series, this was actually drawn by Terry Austin. And I think what's interesting when you compare this to the final cover is that a lot of the detail that was in Doom's face and around the shoulders was actually colored over in the final version. So if you take out your comic books and take a look at it, you'll notice that Mike and Terry's original art was so much more detailed on that, and just great to appreciate in person. So the next project that Mike worked on after Secret Wars was the Punisher Limited Series. And I think this was the series that brought the character into the forefront of Marvel Comics, became one of the biggest characters of the 1980s. And when I met Mike, this is the thing that made the biggest impression on me. I saw all 5 of the Punisher Limited Series covers together, the original art for them, at Mike's booth when I first met him in 1986 at the Creation Comic Convention in Virginia. And so what you see when you look at these and the final paintings is just, again, a lot of detail. So things that you don't notice in the final printed comic, like the fact that Spidey Lives is painted right behind the Punisher's head. And of course, the Punisher came out of Spider-Man in his first appearance in Spider-Man 129. I was blown away by the colors and just how it popped with the green and the way that he sort of tied in this peace symbol with the street light. Again, things that may not have shown in the printed comic. And I was just thinking, as an artist, who does this? I mean, ultimately, what gets printed just isn't as good as what's on here, but an artist that takes the time to create these types of paintings that are, frankly, really realistic, in my opinion, was really sort of the high point of art. And I think it was something that we didn't see a lot in the 1980s. So here at the exhibit, we actually have the covers from the Punisher Limited Series. I was able to collect all 5 of those covers and put them on display for the future generations to see as well. And then after the Punisher Limited Series, Mike went on to another classic project, which is Kraven's Last Hunt. And between Secret Wars, the Punisher Limited Series, and Kraven's Last Hunt, those are 3 stories that have remained in print ever since they ever came out. Kraven's Last Hunt, for those, I'm sure everybody knows, it was a story where Kraven goes after his ultimate prey, which is Spider-Man. And he ultimately buries Spider-Man under the ground. He is actually put in a coffin and suffers traumatic stress from actually being buried alive. But meanwhile, Kraven is impersonating Spider-Man and actually sort of taking over this. And this is really the seminal moment of the series where, he goes through this personality disorder. Is he Kraven? Is he Spider-Man? Here, I think he's affirming that he is Kraven in his own personality, but he's dressed as the Black Spider-Man here and taking over this. Ultimately, the fact that Kraven defeated his greatest foe and was a hunter really gave him nothing to live for. And so the shocking end of this story is that he ends up committing suicide, which is just never done in the comic books at the time. So this, I think, will go down as one of the classic Spider-Man stories of all time. There's rumors that it's going to become a movie relatively soon. But here, for me, this is one of the most classic pages. And I think what's interesting is the top half of the page sort of tells the story of what's going on with Kraven, while the bottom part of the page shows what's going on with Spider-Man while he's buried alive. And I think that type of storytelling and the layout throughout the story is something, again, that wasn't done by any other artist at the time. This fine piece here was something that Mike actually did for me as a commission later on. He actually drew the figures. I wanted a cover-like piece of Kraven, but then I had my friend Gerhard actually draw the background. Gerhard, best known for his work on Cerebus, and I thought it would be an interesting combination. I was really happy with the way that it turned out. So, hey Marvel, if you're watching and you need another cover for a future Kraven's reprint, this might be it. So a lot of people may not know what happened to Mike Zeck. It's sort of after the 90s. So Mike actually started working in licensing art, both for Marvel and for DC. And so a lot of the stuff he did for DC was actually computer-generated stuff. He might do some digital coloring and other things. But for Marvel, he worked for a company called Byron Price, who had done some books of different characters. And so working for Byron Price, he got the opportunity to not only work with his friend Phil Zimmerman again and do some of these great airbrush paintings, but also draw a variety of different characters for Marvel. And so after Mike's Marvel career, he got the opportunity through Mike Carlin to work on Batman 10 Nights of the Beast. They asked him to draw 4 covers for that. It was interesting, when I was a kid, I used to talk to Mike about every month as he was deciding what artwork he was going to sell to me. And I remember talking to him right when he was starting on the very first Batman cover, and he was lamenting to me that he was like, man, I'm really spending way too much time drawing this cover, because I think it was taking him a week to draw that very first cover, Batman 417. But the 4 covers that he drew became classics, and it really sort of solidified his vision of the Batman. And so this is the 3rd cover in the series, ultimately became an art portfolio as well, and very hard to find any of these. But then he went on later to draw some other renditions of the Batman. This is for the Batman 3D book, not seen as well because it wasn't 3D, it wasn't actually in black and white, it was actually sort of a gray. And then he went on to actually draw Batman again in Deathstroke. Deathstroke was a series, it was sort of DC's equivalent of The Punisher. So it was actually a good long gig though for Mike. He worked on it for over 2 years. He drew all the covers for the first issues of Deathstroke the Terminator. And just, it sort of wrapped up his DC career. He would come back, occasionally draw some other things like JLA Classified, but, 2 solid projects that he worked on for DC Comics. So the very first piece of comic art that I had bought from Mike Zeck in 1986 was a G.I. Joe cover. Because when I came to that show, I was like, I was such a big G.I. Joe fan, and I said, I must own a cover. So Mike had the covers to G.I. Joe 45, 46, and 47. And I chose this one right here, which is G.I. Joe 47, to take home with me. I think the price was $45 back in the day. But it was just, it hadn't even hit the stands. And so to be able to see it and hold it and sort of study it, just the detail that was in it just amazed me. Especially as one of my very first comic art purchases. But I went on, Mike would actually call me every month and say, hey, would you be interested in buying some more of my G.I. Joe covers? Frankly, you're the only one that seems to care about them at this point. And as a kid, I wasn't even sure if I was paying between $40 and $50 a piece for them. I wasn't sure if my money was well spent at all, but I just liked it. So I actually bought all the G.I. Joe Special Missions covers, starting with number 1. And I remember he was, when we were on the phone talking about this one, he's like, yeah, I got a guy coming down a freighter. You want to buy it? I'm like, sounds good. I'll go ahead and buy that. But some of the covers that he did here, this number 2 cover with Dennis Jenke as the anchor, one of my personal favorites there. But I was able to buy all the way up through issue 7 of Special Missions. His last issue was number 8. But he also worked on the main title as well as G.I. Joe Yearbook. And this was one that Mike was particularly proud of, which featured Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, and Scarlet. And I remember the time he was like, I've got to ask a lot for this one. I've got to ask $50. He's like, I hope that's not offending you. And ultimately, I'm glad I paid the money for that one. But I think G.I. Joe was one of those things he fit into other projects because he was working on Secret Wars. He was working on other things between 1984 and 1987, but always became sort of the regular. And I think one of those artists that people remember, even though he was the only drawing the covers and not the interiors. So the very last complete story that Mike drew was G.I. Joe 21 for Image Comics in 2003. This was an homage to the original silent issue, issue 21 of G.I. Joe, and this was also number 21. And so here you have, this was actually used, this double page cover, or this cover was actually used as the covers to issues 20 and 21. They actually split it up there. But he invited John Beatty, who was the regular inker on G.I. Joe, back, and they tried to use the style that they were using back in the 1980s, and a lot of the feathering that you'll see techniques he asked John to use as he was inking this. And it's a really dynamic thing. And I think the thing about the silent issue is there are no words. So as you come to the museum, you can actually read the story front to back as it was intended in the book itself. And it doesn't take very long because there aren't actually words on this. But another interesting thing about this is that Mike, while he was drawing this, he said, hey, do you want to buy the artwork for this? And I said, sure, why not? So we agreed on a price on it. And about midway through, I was like, well, since I'm buying the artwork, is there any way that you could work my name into the actual book itself? And so, by the time he got there, I think he was sort of midway through the book. He's like, well, okay, well, we can name the arcade, since there's no actually words in this story, but we'll name the arcade after you. So you see, it's called Costas Corners Arcade. And then as we got further into the story, I was like, well, Mike, is there any way that you could actually work me into the story? And so he's like, well, I'm on page 18 at the moment. Where am I supposed to work you in? I don't have many pages left. So here on page 18, he actually worked me into the background here. It was digitally altered to make it look a little bit more like my actual photo image there, but here I am wearing a little Punisher shirt, sort of symbolizing the fact that I had bought a lot of Punisher art from Mike over the years as well. But little did I know at the time that this was going to be Mike's last sort of complete story that he drew. So very happy to own that and very happy to show that to people that visit the gallery here. So on display at the gallery, we also have a number of the different comic book covers that Mike had worked on. As you can see, it's a variety of different titles, both Marvel, DC, and other. But I think here, it's a great opportunity for folks to relive their childhood a little bit and remember some of those classic covers that Mike drew. Well, thank you for virtually joining us for a tour of the Mike Zeck exhibit here at Ringling College. And one of the last things that we have here is a photo opportunity for people to give us their best pose. So come on out. The exhibit's going on through the end of the month.
There we go. That was great. You did a great job, Chuck.
Except for that last part. I'm not sure my pose was hulky enough there. I think it has to do with my my body not quite being in superhero shape these days.
Well, not many of us can say that we are in superhero shape. I'm not even going to try to flex right now. I feel like I've been sitting behind this desk for about the last 4 months because of winter here. So I'm desperate to get out to the gym and work a little bit. James Siegel, who's in the audience, if he wants to come on and pose, he could do that because he's always working out while he's at home. But so no, great, fantastic exhibit, Chuck. I mean, that's I mean, the kids there, I mean, they don't know how, how really fortunate they are to be able to have all that art in one place at one time. I mean, that's an amazing selection of pieces there. I saw, I think about the only thing I might have wanted to see more of would maybe more cap pages or something, right? I mean, but everything else in there is just a wonderful set of pieces from his comic work. But as Ruben said, 19 years since his last complete story. That's hard to take in. I mean, what's why? I mean, why is that?
Oh, geez. And, I hadn't even thought about that. It really ages me at this point in time. And I think part of it is, Mike, part of it is that he did everything that he wanted to do in comics. I think when you have three stories like the Punisher Limited Series, Secret Wars, and Kraven's Last Hunt that get reprinted over and over again and are considered classics, some could debate whether Secret Wars was a classic story or just a classic event. I think it's hard to go up from there and do more things that you really want to do. And so I think Mike had felt like he had done everything he wanted to do in comics. And there was really no reason. And I think, the other thing is around continuous stories or, the monthly schedule, it's pretty grueling to have to draw a monthly comic book and actually have to draw those panels. So I think as far as storytelling goes, I think as Mike had done other assignments, doing things for licensing, frankly, was a lot easier to focus on, doing specific images. And occasionally he would do some covers here and there. I think the last, even published cover that we did was actually a print that we had done for the Big Wow show back in 2014.
I remember that.
A Punisher image that he had done specifically for a print there, and ultimately became a variant cover for one of the Marvel. Actually, I've got one right here. It's the Punisher. It was the Punisher #2 of the more recent series that he did. But I believe this was Mike's last cover, and even to think about that being in 2014, that was 8 years ago at this point in time. So
right.
Hard to believe that, but I think he had a good long career. I think obviously he's most known for the stuff that he did in the 80s and 90s. We do have, and I don't think it got put up in here, but we do have at least the comic books on display of Damned, which was his creator-owned project that he did with Image, also back in the early 2000s. So I think he also did go down an independent route. We didn't have the space to tell that story as well, and also got to show off his influences from European artists that he had, I'd say, sort of later in his career, where you sort of see his style changing. And I think that was something that we wanted to show here, but we didn't necessarily have the space to show that.
Right. Well, there's, like you say, there's so much room that you can do something like that. But maybe there's an opportunity for another show some other time in the future, maybe. But no, this is lots of positive feedback from the audience. They think you're a natural born exhibition curator and presenter. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for taking an interest in it, and hopefully those that do get a chance or got to see the Raw Fury exhibit, which was slightly different back in 2014. That was my first stab at being able to tell the story of Mike Zeck. I think as I approached this, I wanted to expand the story and talk about his earlier days and show pieces like his very first portfolio pieces, to show an artist, especially from a student's point of view, what was it like to break into the comics industry back then, and how does one's work progress from the very early days when you're just trying to break into the industry all the way towards the end of your career or at the highlights of your career when you're working on something like Kraven. And hopefully the students here get a chance to see that in telling the story of Mike's career.
Right. No, again, great for the students. I mean, I hope they appreciate it, because we as collectors don't get to see shows like this too often. I mean, and the fact that you put this one together, I know you had a hand in the Marvel exhibit as well. So and then I think you've done a few other exhibits prior to even the Marvel one.
Yeah, like I said, we had done the Raw Fury exhibit, the Cartoon Art Museum.
That's
I
right.
had done a smaller Mike Zeck show at my alma mater, University of Maryland. We had done one for University of Maryland Eastern Shore. But yeah, I mean, I think, questions I get too around like, how do you set up an exhibit? And you do learn that you only have a limited amount of space. And I think when as I've sort of even looked at letting pieces go from my collection, part of what I've thought about is, what do I need to really do, or what do I need to retain in order to sort of tell the story of Mike's career if I was to do something like this? And it's been an interesting, way of even thinking about my own collection of like what pieces are really sort of needed and which ones aren't. And there are things like that, those first Submariner tryout pages that, nobody would consider those Mike's best work, but I think from a historic standpoint and telling Mike's story, it was important for me to keep those in my collection. Where unfortunately, Bill, over the years I've let go of too much of my cap art where I didn't have the complete stories. I think once I did I'd worked also on the artist edition that we had done with IDW, and I think that was also a great opportunity to tell the story of Mike's sort of best work. And we'd put a Craven story in there. We'd put the Secret Wars 1 book in there, and we put Punisher 1 and 2 in there, as well as Captain America 265 and 266, which I had owned the complete issues to, but was asked to trade those to get some other Grail pieces for my collection. So I let go. I actually at one point had 4 complete Cap stories, and I have none anymore. So the amount of Cap that's still in my collection is actually is limited. Hopefully the people that now have those complete stories really enjoy them. I wish I had gotten one back, but yeah, but I also felt like, honestly, there was a little bit of repetition between Mike's Cap work and his Secret Wars work, where, there was a lot of Cap in Secret Wars. And so to show the evolution of Mike working from Cap to Secret Wars, I didn't necessarily need to retain that many pieces in the Cap world, but maybe I'll go back and get a few more just to beef up the collection over time.
Well, they'll be a little bit more expensive than when you let them go.
Probably, yeah. I hope they're not $3 million, because I don't quite have that kind of time.
Right. Before I forget, Chris actually asked the same question. Has Mike been to the exhibit at all? Had he got a chance to walk through?
Well, he's been part of the process. We actually had Mike out here at the end of last year to shoot a video, and we actually have if you go out to the Ringling College website, and you can just sort of Google Mike Zeck and Ringling College, you'll actually find the site, and there's a 5-minute video that we put together as part of the exhibit, and that was one of the things that we wanted to add to give a flavor to the students of who is this artist, and hear directly from the artist, since he couldn't be out here. But no, he's been in Florida. I don't believe Mike. We were both actually going to be here this weekend. Unfortunately, he's on the West Coast, and I'm actually going to see him on Sunday. But he's going to actually be in Los Angeles while I'm out here, so I'll be flying back to Los Angeles, and I'll see Mike out there. But he's actually on his way to fly out overseas, so he had to take his COVID test and all that stuff out on the West Coast, and couldn't be here today. But hopefully through something like this, he'll get a chance to see the exhibit. And he was, as we were planning this out, Mike and I consulted together as to how we would tell the story, and so I think he's had an active hand in sort of seeing what we put together. But he basically gave me free rein to put together the story I thought was important.
Oh, well, you did a fantastic job. So the question in the audience was one that I was going to ask you as well. I think you've talked a bit about this already, but what was Zeck's impression of the heritage sale on the for the $3.36 million?
It was funny. I think I was actually the second person to text him, like as soon as because I was watching the heritage sale live when that was all going on, and noting, I was like, 1 million, 1.1 million, 1.2 million. It was just funny to see that how that progressed. I think the immediate response was, wow, can't believe it. Also, can't believe somebody would spend their money on a piece of art like this. But I think he was very realistic in thinking, okay, this isn't a reflection of just how good of an artist I am. Very frankly, he'll admit that Secret Wars page was a rush job. A little bit of a backstory on that is that Mike and John, they were deep in sort of Secret Wars promotion at that point in time, and they were actually going out to San Diego when Secret Wars 8 was coming out. And so you'll notice that John Beatty only worked on a few pages of that book. Only the first few pages were actually inked by John Beatty, which is why they credit Esposito and who was the other inker on that one? Jack Abel, I believe.
Mm.
And so what happened was Mike actually just did sort of rough layouts for that issue versus say full pencils that he would have done on the first issue of Secret Wars. And then Esposito and Abel finished that. And I think we talked a little bit of, even before the auction went on, of who we thought inked that. It was definitely not John Beatty. Most likely it was Jack Abel. And even if you look at the face in the last panel, that's most likely some kind of John Romita Sr. redo of the Professor X page or panel in that last panel there. But was he upset? Does he want a piece of the action, so to speak? No, I don't think he has any expectation that he deserves any of that money. I mean, he'll admit that he would have sold that page and did sell that page back in the day. And when he sold it, he gave up his rights to any future income on it. And it wasn't even a thought, and it wasn't even something that artists thought about at the time. Does he feel honored in some ways? Yes, I think so. And as I've pointed out, I hope it's an opportunity for people to step back and reflect and look at an exhibit like this and say, Mike, he really was one of the most influential artists of the 1980s. He worked on 3 really important series. Secret Wars was one of those. And he did design that black costume, and it did take on a life of its own, no pun intended there,
Mm-hmm.
As it became Venom and became bigger. But and even the popularity of Venom, if Michelini and McFarlane hadn't sort of turned the black costume into Venom, it probably wouldn't be as important as it is, and you wouldn't have somebody that's probably a Venom fan out there that actually purchased that page as the first appearance of Venom, and not necessarily a Mike Zeck piece.
Right.
But I personally think the art that's on display here from Secret Wars 1 is better artwork because it was really before, and you'll even see it in that final panel where there's a lot of notes about Thor's hammer and sort of criticizing the artists about how they were drawing Thor's hammer in that one. That's par for the course on Secret Wars pages, where there was just a ton of corrections to it. And I think as the number of the issues progressed, you see more and more of those corrections and paste overs and whiteout. And I hate to say Secret Wars pages are probably the ugliest Mike Zeck pages that you'll find because of all those corrections. And I think it was partly that Shooter and the editors at the time felt like this had to be sort of perfect. And I think there was also from what I understand too, that Shooter's vision for this battle world was that it was a very large world, and these characters were very small in this world. And so in the first issue, you see some bigger images of the characters. By the time you get to the end, you see them very small, sort of drawn, almost ant size. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
partly because he wanted to emphasize just how large this world was and how small even these superheroes were in that world. But that led to a lot of redrawing. If Zeck's natural style was to draw big and bold characters, which I think you see in almost everything else that he does, here he had to learn how to draw. I don't even count how many characters there are, but let's say there's at least 20 superheroes and 20 supervillains. There was a lot of, it was really the first time any artist had to draw that many characters. Maybe I guess Starlin, if you think about some of the sagas that they did in that era. But it was a lot for one artist to have to take on, having come from a solo book like Cap
Mm-hmm.
to draw every other character under the sun.
Well, I mean, they picked the right guy to do it at the end of the day. I mean, whether or not the consistency was perfect throughout, the entire book. I mean, that does make me really curious. I want to go back and look at that at that Secret Wars page now, just to see the inking differences that you're mentioning there. I mean, it must have been a challenge for not only Zeck, but for the people in the bullpen to kind of pull those books together. Especially if Shooter was making so many changes and wanting to get things right and keep continuity with the other books in line at the same time. I mean, it couldn't have been an easy task or really a fun time for people on staff doing the work and trying to keep everybody happy and keep to the schedules that they were on.
Well, I think issue 12 is the ultimate of that. And there's a page I think actually out in Heritage right now, which is from issue 12 that Art Adams and Mike Mignola actually contributed to. I mean, and they were sort of newcomers in the Marvel world at that point in time. So it was really all hands on deck as they were finishing some of the later issues. And you also think about it too, the average book I think was 20 to 22 pages back then. I think most of these books are around 25 or 26 pages. So even on a monthly book, they were a little bit larger than a typical monthly book was. And then you got to issue 12, which was a double-sized issue, and they had to keep everything on deadline because it was the most important book that was coming out. And the circulation on these, Shooter had told me at one point, I think they were over 1 million copies an issue, which at the time, X-Men I think was probably the top of the print runs in that time frame. But Secret Wars had dwarfed any other book, so it was selling just a ton of copies, and so it was very important that they get everything right with that. And as people may also remember, Bob Layton filled in on a couple of the issues 4 and 5, just to sort of keep things going in the middle of the series as well, and gave Zeck a bit of a rest on that. So
yeah, that's it was an interesting time. I enjoyed the books, but the covers were the things that really sucked me in. I mean, right? I mean, the first Secret Wars book cover. I mean, once you picked that up, you just knew you had to buy the rest. You're going to be reading all the books, and it was because of that cover. I mean, one of the most one of the most memorable covers from Marvel during that period, right? I mean, it's such a great image of all the characters coming at you in a way that and just it was just, I don't know, it was so captivating for me, because I bought it off the newsstands too. So it was exciting. I mean, I don't think, but like you said, it's maybe not the best story that was out there, but as far as a piece of history from Marvel, it's something that, I mean, for those of us who got to experience it firsthand when it was coming out, it was an event. It was like one of those first big events in comics that had a lot of crossover and ties that we see as commonplace today, and certainly in the 90s was commonplace all the time. But for that time period, it was pretty revolutionary.
Yeah, and you also have to put it in context of keeping in mind, the ultimate goal for Marvel was to sell as many copies as they could. And if you were a fan of Avengers, or if you're a fan of whatever the title was, they were all crossing over into this book, so you had to buy it. So that's why it got over 1 million copies. But also remember, the secondary reason for that series was to sell toys, because they had a whole toy line that Mattel was pushing at the time. And so you had all these kind of goofy vehicles in the middle of all this, that they were also trying to provide context similar to what they did with Transformers and G.I. Joe for this toy line, so that people would understand what these vehicles were and how to use them in the ways they were playing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of us forget that part of Secret Wars and focus on, was it a good or not so good story? I personally don't think it was the best, story that Marvel ever produced, but it was a great opportunity to figure out how to bring all the Marvel universe together. I thought Contest of Champions was also a good one, but I think a lot of the characters that were in Contest of Champions were sort of newer characters that they had created specifically for that, because that was originally supposed to be it was supposed to be an Olympic event that was, I believe, a summer annual or something like that, or that was originally a treasury, I believe, that was converted into Contest of Champions.
Right.
But anyway, it looks like you were moving on to Craven there, or what
I was. I should have started at the top of everything here, just. but let's see. Let me try to get that back on here. The Craven piece is great. Here we go.
Yeah. So, I mean, what can I say about Craven? I unfortunately, a lot of these books are still complete. The history on these, for folks that don't know, is all 6 of these books were kept complete with the covers. For a collector in Italy had purchased all these after Mike had sold it. Actually, I think it was Bob Latimer that actually bought all 6 books, and then they were sold over to a collector in Italy. And then, it's hard to believe, maybe it's at least 15 years ago, they were all put up for sale sort of behind the scenes, and a lot of people bid on these. And one collector ended up buying all of them, and then released. Mike Berkey ended up getting a couple of the books and breaking them up and selling some of the individual pages. So I think anything that's out there is sort of limited to the pages that Mike made available to the public. And for me, this was the best page that had come out of that. There were some other great pages as well, but this one really resonated for me. And I didn't actually get this directly from Mike. For people that remember, when Mike was selling these things, they almost instantly sold as soon as Mike told people that he was getting these books. People sort of put in their word for the pages that they want, and they sold, within minutes. And so you had to call Mike up I remember calling him from New York, and I was like, Mike, do you have this page? And he's like, oh, so, it's like, he's like, go, I think he was like, go and just order on my website and reserve it, make sure you get it. And so there was a little bit of a mad rush to get some of the initial pages, and the ones that were sort of left over, stuck around for a little bit, but, there's not that many of these pages out there. And then a couple years later, a collector had purchased this, and I think we worked out a deal I think I may have had to trade a GI Joe cover plus, and ended up getting this plus some cash for that. But for me, this was really the ultimate page from the series that I remembered and symbolized, Kraven at his core. It's like, he's asserting himself as the dominant, dominant hunter, but in the back of his mind, he doesn't know who he is anymore, because he thinks he's the Spider. Is he a Spider? Is he Kraven? And this really said it all. And I just love the layouts of how you just sort of follow the bottom panels of, is Spider-Man eventually going to make it out of the grave? And, for issue after issue, you sort of have this repetitive looking at the grave and different spiders crawling on the grave and water, sort of dripping down. That type of storytelling. Yeah, I don't know why Mike, sort of chose to do that differently here. I think he approached this project and, had a real passion for this project and just pulled some new stuff out of his toolbox on this one. It told the story a slightly different way. And I think McLeod's inks on this one were great. I think by the time he got to issue 6, he was probably doing more breakdowns, but you couldn't tell it because McLeod was sort of dialing up his own penciling abilities, to keep it as consistent as possible. So just overall, the quality of Kraven's Last Hunt in all 6 issues was really sort of great, where I think you look at a lot of typical Zeck projects, whether it be the Punisher Limited Series or Secret Wars, and the first issues are really great because Mike's doing full pencils, but by the time you get to the end, he's doing breakdowns, and it shows in just sort of the final product.
Well, working with McLeod was, McLeod's fantastic, on his own, but as a team, them working together, I mean, it was an excellent choice to have his inker on this. So great tandem. And back to Mike. Rubin said, in the interest of admitting when I was wrong, I honestly thought Mike's prices on those pages would result in very few sales. I do remember when Mike had those, and that was the thing. It was almost like an event when Mike put those up, because everybody wanted a page from the storyline. So many people wanted a page. I mean, who wouldn't want a page from that storyline? Even one of the the least valuable pages. So I think I would probably even agree with Ruben. Like back then, I probably thought the prices were high, but it didn't deter collectors. And when you look at the market today, and that's just a drop in the bucket as far as like what a page like this would be like on the market today.
Yeah, and I was actually surprised that the pages that stuck around for a number of years stuck around that long. And I think even some of those pages would go for, we're starting to see some of those pages resell now for like 20,000 plus.
Right.
And it is a classic series. And I think, maybe at first people were hoping more issues would be brought to market, but, since that sale, none of them have. And we were lucky, so some of those books are still complete, and we were able to put the first issue in the artist edition that's out there from IDW, just to be able to show people what a complete book looked like, all together. And so, like I said, I don't have many examples. And the other example that you see here at the exhibit is actually a piece I had Mike create with Gerhard, thinking, frankly, I don't know if I was ever going to get one of the covers. So, what kind of cover quality piece can I get Mike to do? And also knowing Mike, he doesn't really do commissions. And so he did the figures for me, but I didn't think he wanted to necessarily do the backgrounds on it. So that's why I'm listening to Gerhard, knowing Gerhard's, the greatest background artist ever.
Exactly.
It was like, let's see what this combination looks like. And I was frankly thrilled with the final result. Although it's not McLeod, and I know, McLeod had a big part of this, and I want to give him kudos as well for shaping the series. I thought that piece that those two did together for me was awesome. And that's out in my calf if people want to look at that in more detail.
I was just going to ask you if it's in your calf, because I know it wasn't one of the detail scans that you sent me.
Yeah, it's out there in the calf. So take a look at it there. And Gerhard had actually done a color version of that. We didn't color the actual original. We actually had a print made of that, and he hand colored that one for me too, just to feel what it would look like if it was a color cover type piece. So if anybody out there has a Kraven piece, congratulations to you. I think it really is one of the highlights of Mike's career, and they are very, very hard to come by.
I mean, in the moment, do you think Mike realized how important that book would be, or how well remembered it would be?
I do think he actually had that vision when he saw that script and read it, and just, and that's why he took the extra time to do it in such a great way. I do think he knew it was a a story when you read the ending of that story and the twists and turns of that story. I think he knew it was very well written, and he wanted to do it justice and bring it to life as best he could. And I think soon after, obviously, they went to trade paperback pretty much directly after they finished printing that. And they actually did new color blue lines. They actually, instead of doing the old color separation process, they actually created, airbrush versions of each of those pages to sort of bring it to the quality of a Dark Knight. So I think he knew very, very quickly that he was sort of on that level of a Dark Knight type book that he had been working on, and they did a couple extra covers as well for the trade as well as the hardback version that they reprinted as a graphic novel.
So Ruben was asking, are the other 4 complete issues still in Europe, or are they?
No, they are not in Europe. They are there. I do know where they are. Some are with the original collector that purchased all 6 of them, and then the others are not necessarily.
There you go. So then they're not in Europe anymore. Question answered, Ruben. Oh, and I see Lawrence Klein is in the audience. Nice to see you, Lawrence.
Good to see you, Lawrence. Lawrence was on with us during the Ed Hannigan sale. So
exactly, and we did have some Hannigan things to talk about. But why don't we look at a couple more of the? I'll pull up a couple other images here to talk about. Maybe one of the $50 GI Joe covers you were buying back in the day.
No, this was $45. This was $45. No, this was maybe it was 40. It was the very first cover I bought from Mike. So the story of me meeting Mike was there was a creation convention in Alexandria, Virginia in January of 1986, which is right when the Punisher Unlimited series was coming out. I think the first issue had already hit the stands. It was impossible to find. For some reason, and I can't remember exactly which issue was out. It was either issue 2 or issue 3, probably issue 2. But when Mike showed up at the show, he had 3 G.I. Joe covers, the 40, 45, 46, and 47. And he had issues 2, 3, and 4 of the Punisher Limited series. He had already sold all of issue 1 of the Punisher Limited series to Latimer, who sort of had first dibs on everything back in the day. And so, I didn't know Mike at the time, but I was really big into G.I. Joe, and I was like, wow, if he has a G.I. Joe cover, I want to buy one. I guess I could kick myself for not buying the 46, which is the classic Snake Eyes Storm Shadow. But I felt I guess I was just, this cover hadn't hit the stands. And just so you know, I think issue 45 may have just been hitting the stands. So I think 46 and 47 weren't even out. But I just looked at the detail on this. Didn't even know the characters, because I think this is the first Beachhead. I didn't even know who the characters were in the book, but I said, wow, just the way he's drawing this in the detail, this is the cover that I have to, sort of out of the 3 have to choose. It started me on my path of collecting G.I. Joe covers with Mike. Like I said at the time, he was like, he didn't, you'll notice he didn't even sign a lot of these. I think this one may say, some of them say Z and B. I don't even think this one's signed, is it? It's at the bottom, but I don't know.
Right. I was trying to see if it's in the art anywhere. I don't think so.
I don't think you do. And I think, he didn't sign him because he didn't think that, frankly, people were even noticing his artwork there. And so I think you see, it is funny that, the things that I think we all remember is there are these G.I. Joe covers. But to Mike, I don't think he even, thought that people were paying attention, because I think he was known for Cap and other things at the time that, who was going to notice, he was drawing these G.I. Joe covers. But I think we all did. And I think, I said, look, if nobody wants your G.I. Joe covers or nobody's buying this, I'll be happy to buy them every month, even though I'm a kid. But I think I can try to scrounge up, I mow lawns, I can scrounge up $40 a month. And for me, that was my art budget. And, it was all going to Mike Zeck at that point in time, whenever he, called up. And so most of most of what I ended up buying ended up being the Secret Wars covers. I thought it was, or it's not Secret Wars, Special Missions covers, because I thought it was neat that I could start with issue 1. And so I got, I have here on display all issues 1 through 7. Never sold any of the ones that I bought. And in fact, 7 and 8, there was sort of a funny story behind that, which is I didn't buy those directly from Mike because there was I think it was Jim. Maybe I get it was Jim Ivy or no. There was somebody I think down in Florida, and there was a poker game that Mike was part of. And instead of putting in money, I think he actually put in artwork and lost it. And is what I heard. So I ended up not getting issue 7 and 8, and they ended up. I found them in the Comic Buyer's Guide years later, and I bought issue 7 there, and I think I was a little too late on the trigger for issue 8. But yeah, sometimes I missed out on covers because they ended up going into a poker game. So that's kind of funny story.
You gotta keep him away from the poker table.
Yeah, he's not, I don't think I've heard of him going to the poker table recently, but it is a shame that my G.I. Joe covers ended up not in my possession because of stuff like that. But yeah, it was great that I bought as many as I did. So, and Mike always over the years was like, "Did you sell them? I've heard they're worth money now." And I'm like, "No, just wanted to keep them." So I have sold a few covers that I've acquired, but those were ones that I acquired secondhand. I felt more of a connection to the ones I bought directly from Mike.
Sure. So that first meeting, was that really the first time you met him? Was that Creation Con?
Yeah, I have a vague remembrance of seeing Mike at promoting Secret Wars, because I think he did come to DC at some point. Maybe it was around the time Secret Wars 8 was out. But I don't think I really even went over and talked to him at that point in time, and I don't think he was selling the original art at that point in time. So, and I wasn't even buying original art, so I didn't really talk to him until '86.
Interesting. So, I mean, did you go to the show knowing that you were going to buy art from him, or if it was available? Was that kind of the mission going in?
It was, and I only really started collecting comic art probably in 1985. So my career buying comic art was pretty short. I had met Rich Rankin, who at the time was working on the Elementals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was very nice to me. And I think the first page I bought was Elementals 2-page 1. And again, no characters on it, but I just liked it because the detail and the drawing on it. It was a picture of the FBI building in Seattle. I still have that page today too. But back then comic art was $5, $10 a page, and so I bought. I similar to Mike, I actually used to talk to Rich Rankin on the phone, pretty much on a monthly basis as well, just to understand. I don't know. Maybe I just didn't have enough friends that I just became friends with comic book artists. But as having interest in sort of art myself, it was great to be able to talk to these guys just about sort of their techniques and what they were working on. And so, I think I had gotten a taste of buying from Rich. I remember Ron Friends coming to some shows as well. I think I bought a Spidey page from Ron for $5. And then, I think with Mike, because I knew he drew G.I. Joe, and I actually knew that the dealer friend that I was helping, I used to be like a dealer's assistant, and I get paid $10 a day in credit to, basically work the table. But he told me that he's like, yeah, I'm going to be set up next to Mike Zeck and John Beatty for the entire show. And I was just like, then this is going to be an opportunity. And first thing, as soon as I got to the show, I was like, what art did you bring with you? And they brought out way too much art, and I didn't know how much they were going to have. And so I bought the G.I. Joe cover, and then I saw the Punisher art, and I was just like, I got to get something there. So the first day I bought 2 pages of Punisher art. I think it was the first page from issue 2, and then I bought a page at the end where the guy's neck gets cut off in the Metro. And then Mike at the end of the day was like, well, don't you want to buy the rest of the book? And I'm like, well, how much is that? And he was just like, well, I'll cut you a break. And so I think it ended up being $400 for the entire issue. And so I went home, talked to my parents and said, hey, can you lend me some money? I'll work it off the rest of the summer. So they lent me the remainder of the $400 that I needed to buy Punisher 2. And I bought my first complete book from Mike. So that was, and then he was like, don't you want issues 3 and 4? And I'm like, no, Mike, I cannot buy anymore. So that's when the decision was made to break up issues 3 and 4. So that's why issues 3 and 4 are the only issues you can actually find a Punisher page from. But yeah, so the what you're showing now, which is the cover to Punisher 1, I did not, Mike had all 5 of those covers on display on easels around his table, in addition to all this other art. It was if you're a Mike Zeck fan, that creation show was amazing. So he had all 5 of these, and I was blown away by the size of these. I'd never seen comic art that was that large. I was blown away by the colors, because the way that Zimmerman painted these things, they just popped, and they were not even framed or anything, I think, at the time. And they were, Mike was asking $1,000 a piece for these Punisher Limited Series covers, and again, you could buy a complete issue from him for $400 of the Punisher. So for me, it was a little bit better to buy, the 20, 25 or 26 pages of the complete book, as opposed to a cover. But I love these covers, and this is, again, I don't even think I took a picture of them at the time, but I had this mental picture in my mind of just how amazing it was. And you see things like the Spidey Lives, it's right behind the Punisher's head there. It's like you could see these details that you didn't see in the printed comic books. And that also just sort of had me, sort of drawn to original art. But they were sold, I think, most of the covers were all pre-sold, I think Mike said at that point in time. I think Latimer had bought the cover to issue 1. And the only one that I think was still even up for consideration was issue 3, which is the classic one of him with the target behind him.
Yeah.
And, here's my mentality at the time, which I was like, well, if you're going to spend $1,000, I at least want a background on that that's like fully drawn. That's like mostly white in the background. I'm pretty sure it didn't take him that much time to draw that. So, I thought about it for a second, but I was like, A, I don't have $1,000, and B, I was like, well, I just can't see spending that for something that doesn't have a full background. That's just crazy. Yeah, age will add perspective to life, and you realize your own fallacies and how stupid you sound later on. So, yes, so that of course is one of my favorite covers now.
Of course, and but you were in your early 20s, late teens. I mean, at this point, so
my mid-teens, Bill.
Mid-teens. All right, I'm sorry. Hey, I'm trying to date myself, trying to figure out, okay, how old is Chuck? Because
I'm not that old. Come on, but no.
All right,
I was a young kid. I couldn't even drive. I had to take the metro to get to these conventions. So taking one of these paintings home would have been impossible. But years later, sort of one by one. This was owned by Latimer. I believe it was then later owned by Kevin Eastman, and then ultimately Albert Moy got it. And I had bought from Pete Koch the precursor to this, which was the actual Punisher Limited Series. It was actually a poster that was released before the Punisher Limited Series came out, the first Punisher poster. So I bought that from Pete Koch right before, and I think Albert had heard about that, and then brought this to a 1999 convention up in New York. I think is where we worked out a deal on this one. And so this was the first of the Limited Series covers that I was able to sort of acquire, a good one. And also in that, I believe at that same time, I had gotten the complete interiors from the 1999 Sotheby's auction, where that had come from Kevin Eastman had owned that as well. And so he and Bob Latimer had owned it before that, but they released the entire interior, all 40 pages, to issue 1 of the Punisher. And that's, the first time I bid in an auction, I maxed out my credit card buying that. But for me to own all of issue 1 and all of issue 2 was a dream come true. And then I was able to get the covers for issues 1 and 2 not too long after that. And then it was gravy when I could track down the covers of 3, 4, and 5.
Sure.
Because in my mind, the ultimate was to be able to do exactly what I'm doing now, which is display them for other people to have that same experience of seeing all these 5 covers together, which is what really drew me to Mike Zeck's artwork in the first place. And I hope, not sure where they'll end up after I'm no longer here. But I hope to be able to either donate them or, keep them together so that, in the future, other people get the pleasure of experiencing what I got to experience that day in 1986.
That's a very noble way to approach the hobby. I think, that's why sites like CAF are able to, thrive, just because people do like to, be able to display their work and have other people appreciate it. And you doing that out in the public is it's, like I said, it's a very noble thing to do, because a lot of us, I'd be leery of putting my artwork on display. I know it's very commonplace nowadays. I mean, just at the Marvel exhibit, you see all the names. Albert's donating artwork to that, and there was some the work by you, and I mean Ben had art there, but then you've got Halperin and who else? Wow, I'm drawing a blank on a couple of the other donors there. Mandel's artwork was there, Will Gabrielle. So there's a lot of collectors that are willing to let their work be seen, and I think that's it's important, and I'm sure it's going to continue, because with the success of the Marvel exhibit and shows like this one, I'm going to have to believe that we're going to start seeing more shows like this in the future.
I hope so, yeah. And as you mentioned, this piece was on display at the Marvel exhibit in one of the previous iterations of that. It does change around as well. And so, I mean, we don't necessarily have to get into the whole history of the Marvel exhibit. That's going on for a number of years at this point in time. But Ben Saunders, who's the curator on that, we worked from the early days deciding what stories we want to tell about what characters and what pieces we wanted to display there. But I think what's great about that Marvel exhibit is it's really, we started with the cream of the crop of like, what are the ideal pieces to have. And I think folks, like Eric Roberts as well, had donated some pieces out of their collections. That these are people that had really the top pieces. And when you think about the Punisher piece, when I thought of what we want to put out there, I have Romita's very first sketch of the Punisher, which I got from Mike Berkey, and actually came directly from John Romita a few years ago. But I thought that was a really important piece to put on display, as well as a Mike Zeck piece. So I wanted to have really thinking through like who are the artists that really represent us and what are the pieces. And we went after those, and we were lucky enough to get those for that Marvel exhibit to put alongside the props and the costumes, which I also have a passion for. And that's my sort of my day-to-day job is helping to find those pieces, but also sell those pieces. But being able to put those sort of the physical together with the original sort of concepts that came from the comics, in my mind, is really the ultimate exhibit that we could put on.
Yeah, and I don't know how I could forget Eric Roberts. I mean, it seemed like 50% of the art at the exhibit was provided by Eric. So yeah, my hat's off to him. That's a long time to be away from a lot of your artwork, some of your prized possessions.
It is, and I've had the pleasure of meeting, and Eric's had me over to his house, and thank you, Eric, for doing that. And I think Eric is just one of those. If you haven't gotten to know Eric, he's just a very giving person, and I'm just astounded by his generosity, and sort of he inspires me too to want to continue to do this as well. So I'm glad to see other people out there like Eric that frankly just have just love in their heart for this hobby and the people out there and wanting to give back and create that sort of joy for others. So thanks, Eric. I appreciate it if you're watching this.
Hopefully he will. To pivot a little bit from Marvel, I know you sent me 2 DC images, so why don't we talk about this one first?
Yeah, we can. We'll kind of go in reverse order. I think so. When you think about Mike's career at DC, as I said in the video, there's really sort of 2 characters you think of. This was DC's version of the Punisher. So I think when I think it was Mike Carlin that was also over there, the first person that they thought of when they were trying to bring this character into his own series was Mike. So starting with the first issue, you've got a classic Mike Zeck cover for Deathstroke the Terminator, and this was actually one of the final pieces that was done. It was a poster that they had done for retail. They did this in a Vigilante, which was the female character from the series. But the interesting story behind this particular piece is this is not the final version of the poster that was out there. That was actually black and white art that was there. But this is an airbrushed version that was done over a blue line. So some people might go, "Oh, it's a blue line. It's not truly original." Mike had there was another artist that he was working with outside of Phil Zimmerman named Jan Tetro, and Jan was the person that actually colored those particular posters. And I think Mike has a history, and I think thinking about Ringling School, one of the stories that's not told about Mike is him being a teacher as well. So I think we can talk about John Beatty. John Beatty was a teenager when he approached Mike and said, "Hey, I want to be in the industry." And Mike would provide him samples of things to work on. He would actually send him, whether it was his layouts of Master of Kung Fu, and said, go ahead and ink these. And when I was, an artist, he would send me photocopies of the Punisher Limited series and say, "Here, practice inking on the Punisher Limited series." I'm like, what better material could you work with than Mike Zeck's, I guess, copies of his original pencils for that? Well, here with Jan Tetro, he was giving Jan some work as far as, finessing his painting. So they created a number of blue lines and black lines of this particular piece. And I just thought that the painting on this was fantastic. I mean, if you like airbrush painting, I thought Jan had done, in fact, a better job on this particular piece than the final piece, which was just black and white art that was colored sort of the more traditional way. So I bought this from Jim Warden. I think the funny story on this is I went to a convention and they used to give giveaways. And I was I won the giveaway for the prize, and I think it was $75 credit to use at a dealer table. And I think it was funny. I was drawn to Jim's booth. Jim had the covers to G.I. Joe 5960, which were $50. Maybe they were $75. They were also $75 a piece. And then he had this painting, which may have been actually more than $75. But I used my money to buy this painting from Jim Warden and got it framed years ago and put it on the wall. And I just loved it because it was the DC equivalent of one of those sort of Punisher paintings that he had done, but in the 90s.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I did forget to ask you this question earlier that Ruben posted. He wanted to know on the 5-issue Punisher series if Zimmelman airbrushed over the pencils or his own Lightbox pencils.
Yeah, good question. Mike, for the most part, and in the video you see an example of the Red Skull card. That was the typical process that was used starting with all the Punisher paintings back in the day. So yes, there is a pencil version of each of those Punisher Limited series covers that is out there in addition to that. And so what Mike would do is there was a tool that was called the Artograph, which is essentially a big projector. And Norman Rockwell had used this. So what he would do is actually take the smaller version of the pencils and blow it up, and then essentially, I guess the equivalent of sort of light boxing it, sort of trace the autograph so that it was on a larger board. But he would actually do all the pencils himself, and then he would hand over a penciled version of the piece to Phil Zimmerman to paint on. But because he wanted to keep all the detail, he would give also Phil the smaller version that had all the detail and shading in it. So those pieces are pretty cool if you can actually find them in their original state. For the Punisher Limited Series, though, the covers to issues 1 and 3, Mike decided they would actually be, sort of tighter pieces if he actually inked them. So he went back and inked them a few years later, sort of in the late 80s. I think when he sold them through Jim Warden, so they could charge a little bit more for those. So I think Dave Mandel's in his gallery, you'll find the Punisher #1 cover. The 3 is out there as well, and I think we put that in the artist edition so you can see what that looks like. But issues 2, 4, and 5 are sort of in their original pencil state in that shaded format that are out there. But yes, they're the only Punisher piece, or even I guess the only piece that I know of where they didn't work that way, and we still haven't 100% proved it, is the graffiti poster. The graffiti poster that people might remember, where Mike's got this big gun and it's got a bunch of different names of different artists and friends of Mike in the background. That was originally done for a Marvel Fanfare piece back in the day that I believe Dennis Jenke had inked that particular piece for Marvel Fanfare. And I think when they decided to turn that into a poster, it just made more sense to blue line that. So I actually own that piece as well. But I bought it from Jim Warden, and I think as we were, working on the deal, it was a big price difference of whether or not it was blue lined or wasn't. Ultimately, I frankly thought it was just a great piece no matter what. But I think we thought 95% it was probably that one was blue lined versus penciled. But everything else that you see sort of done in that format by Zimmerman should be pencils, except for these DC pieces, which were done by Jan Tetro. Those Vigilante and the Terminator pieces, Deathstroke the Terminator pieces are blue lines typically if you see an airbrushed version of those. And there's multiples of them as well. So there was more than one of those that was done because they were done for resale purposes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense. Definitely makes sense. Let's see. And here was the other DC piece.
Yes. So this was, as I said, Mike spent so much time working on these, but he just, loved the chance to draw Batman. This was really his first chance to officially draw it. I think he had drawn him in the fanzines before, but DC was finally giving him a shot. And I think this was a purchase from Albert Moy. It was actually my very first purchase from Albert Moy at that 99 Sotheby's auction. I think I met him there and picked up this piece. I will say it was $800 back then, which was, a lot for a Zeck piece. But sure. In retrospect, money well spent on that. But in these covers, just frankly, I don't think another one has been up for sale since '99. Everybody wants to keep these covers, but there were 4 of them that were done. Personally, I had this in the first one. The cityscapes he was doing for these, I thought were so amazing on this. On this one, you'll notice the chest emblem was changed a little bit. There is actually a stat that's on the back of it right now where they redrew the chest emblem. I guess Carlin didn't like the way that the chest emblem was portrayed on this and made it a little bit rounder. But just love the detail on this and just the tension between KG Beast and Batman on this one. And you can also see a style. So in this one, you actually see, if you show the top of that, you see sort of the I think it's the toothbrush. Sort of the equivalent of the cheap version of the airbrushing that was going on. And so I think on this particular cover, this was actually done. Mike both penciled and inked this, and he would do this. I think later on he would move to using sort of hand-created Zipatone, if you want to look at it that way. Mike would actually print out the Zipatone on a printer and then lay it down. On this particular cover, I think it was before he started doing the Zipatone versions of these and actually sort of used the splatter effect in there himself. And then you can see some white out in there where he would touch up the buildings and give that appearance of lighting on this particular one. So, very happy to have a 10 Nights of the Beast. And there's one other piece that we sort of glance over in there, which is he did do an airbrush version of there was a 10 Nights of the Beast trade paperback that was done to collect them all. And that was also similar. He worked with Phil Zimmerman on that one. And that's, I guess you can look at it as the 5th 10 Nights of the Beast cover that was actually done. So happy to have that, which is a little bit larger and airbrushed for that. And then there was, for other folks there should be 2 other portfolio plates because these were done so well. And I think Mike, if Mike's out there, he can probably tell me if he remembers. But I vaguely remember like DC paying him like $150 to draw each of these covers, which maybe I'm off on that. Maybe it was a little bit more, but for as much work as went into these things, whatever he got paid was just not enough. They sort of made it up to him by publishing it as this 10 Nights of the Beast portfolio, for which he added 2 additional portfolio plates. And so those are out there as well, if you're a 10 Nights of the Beast fan. And then he came back and did a few pinups. I think there was one in Detective, and there was this Batman 3D piece that I also have with Two-Face that is just incredible. Sorry that I didn't send you a scan of that, but if you watch the video again, you'll see that piece is in there as well. So, Mike got to revisit Batman a few more times, and as well as with Deathstroke the Terminator, the most classic being the Deathstroke the Terminator 8 cover, which is also on display here, where you've got sort of Big Ben in the background and Batman teamed up with Deathstroke the Terminator on top of the tower, which is just an amazing cover as well.
Yeah, that's I wondered when Marcus was going to mention that Bill Lash thing. That's an inside joke. He waited until now to finally say it. But yeah, that's I mean, I just can't even imagine being able to see that piece in person. It's stunning. The backgrounds are stunning. I mean, just his style in this piece. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I'm envious, Chuck. I mean, you've got to, you really have an amazing collection.
You got to remember, it's a lifetime that I've been building this collection. And for me, it's been 35 years. I mean, putting it out in perspective, it's been 19 years since Mike drew a complete book, but I met Mike in 36 years. I met him in 86. And ever since then, I've been building this collection. And to be able to have a collection that tells a story of an artist, I think everybody gets, example pieces here and there. But for me, it's been a journey. Frankly, I've owned maybe at least twice as much, if not 3 times as much, Mike Zeck art over the years. And I've let some of it go, partly to other collectors, but also to fund other purchases. And I think what's great about this collection is, in some ways, this is the culmination of my collecting of Mike's work, to be able to tell a story. And I don't think you always get to do that with your collection.
Right.
And it's not necessarily even the end goal for a lot of people, but I think this has helped. Being able to put on an exhibit like this has helped sort of clarify, what is the purpose of collecting all this. And for me, I love to be able to share this story with people that are walking around, just like they are right now at the exhibit while I'm here.
Yeah, I didn't know.
It's actually a lot of exhibits going on where people are coming and visiting. So.
Well, I hope we're not distracting them from all the artwork. I wondered if it was actually going to be open while we were doing this. So that's great that you've got people walking around.
You do. If you hear noises, hopefully they won't. Nobody's come and asked me questions. Although there was a child that was right in front of me taking pictures of the GI Joe art that was right here, which was kind of funny. But
yeah, no, it's and Ruben just said the only thing he's envious of with you, Chuck, is your ability to stay focused on your quest for one artist all these decades.
Like I said, I have not only, people don't know that other side of it. I do have Ditkos, I do have Kirby's. The other part of my collecting has been, I think focus deep, at least on the Mike Zeck stuff, but also find nice examples of other things that either I found important or inspired me, or some of the great artists, or even the classic key issues. So, I guess I've also delved into Punisher and GI Joe, but there's things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that I don't talk about very often. That I also have a passion for, and they have a deeper collection of. Transformers. I don't think everybody knows me as a Transformers guy, but I have a pretty fair collection of that type of stuff as well. So there's other paths I've gone down, but I think with those, it's been harder to tell a story. I think with GI Joe, I've had the opportunity to maybe delve a little bit deeper into that collection and do some podcasts and other things around those, but. I think that for me, telling the stories behind the pieces and being sort of the expert on it is a fun thing to do. But when you have one piece of everything, it's very hard to sort of create that unless you're really just sort of telling the story of comics. And even for something like when we do the Marvel exhibit, it's been great where I have a great John Byrne piece, that I could loan to the exhibit, or I've got, so I happen to have things in my collection, or I have the very first Ant-Man Uncle Ben story that predates Amazing Fantasy 15 that one day is going to be revealed. And seen in public, but I have pieces like that I can lend to these exhibits, and that also brings me joy that I can do that. But those are also stories that for me just touched a certain chord, and similar to everything else that we all collect, there's a reason I have it, and the reason I enjoy it.
Yeah, Rick Welch also says that you've got some great Fish Police art as well.
I think Rick owns some of my fish police art now. But thank you. And that, that was, going a little bit on a tangent, but for me, that was also a journey to get to know Steve Moncouse, which I think,
Mhm.
Frankly, I think those early days of the black and white revolution of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and some of those other things, that for me, I actually, people may not know it, I think it is my calf gallery. I actually drew the cover of Saga of Elf-Face #3 at the age of 14. That was my very first published comic book work. But that was because of the black and white explosion that was going on, and books like Fish Police that were out there that showed that you could actually make money publishing a small press book. That gave me an opportunity to work for one of those small press books at the age of 14 and to draw something. I didn't turn out to be Rob Liefeld or anything like that. I was really sort of like, burned out very quickly in my career of that. But a few years ago, I was in San Francisco, happened to get a hold of Steve Moncouse, and he had a lot of his original artwork still around. And, frankly, a lot of people hadn't necessarily thought about Steve Moncouse in a while. And so for me, it was a joy to meet him in person and meet his family and, buy some of his artwork and hopefully that money, came in handy for him. But for me, it was just great. And, also glad I did buy a lot of it. So I'm glad I could share it with some other folks like Rick. And sorry, Rick, if I shouldn't have told people that you didn't have Fish Police art, because they're now going to come after you looking for Fish Police. So.
It's out there now. But and also Ruben mentions that he's envious that you had to give up the cherry blossoms to go live in sunny Southern California.
It is a trade-off. I do love the cherry blossom season, and I really love the collectors that were part of that sort of Washington, D.C., sort of East Coast collecting thing. I'm happy to announce if Bill, you haven't announced it elsewhere. I don't want to.
I haven't yet. I thought about doing it last night, but I figured I didn't even mention the torpedo thing, so we can mention both of those things now.
Sure. Yeah. So I thanks to some of the people that Larry Tunn and Lee Benica, they're continuing on the tradition of the cherry blossom and actually announced that they're going to be hosting a new cherry blossom this year, or a continuation of the cherry blossom. I think it's on March the 26th. If you're interested, I don't know if Larry's here, but you can reach out to Larry Tunn, probably ask him through his CAF. But if you're in that sort of Washington, D.C., or anywhere on the Eastern Corridor, anywhere from probably New York down through Virginia or even North Carolina, it's worth coming out for this, because it's really where all the collectors bring all their stuff to show and just allow other people to enjoy their collections. And so people will buy, sell, and trade. It's a sort of an informal convention, but it's really just a chance for you to bond with other collectors out there in a casual environment. I'm very so happy that they're continuing on the tradition of doing that. Who knows? I might even fly out there for it. I've talked to my wife, and there's a chance I might even be able to get out to the East Coast just so I can be part of it. But that collecting group over there, I can't even name all the names there, but just some fantastic people. And I have such fond memories of being able to hang out with everybody there and seeing all the great artwork that's, on the East Coast. Who would have thought that DC is a collecting hub, but it really is for a lot of that. And I think it's, partly Jim Warden's station there and people that have bought things from him over the years. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things, and just being located between New York and accessible. The DC comic scene was always strong, and we had a lot of artists that would show up at local conventions all the time that would sell their things. And I think that helped us all build our collections in the Washington, D.C. area. So that's that. And you mentioned torpedo, so other people may know me on the West Coast. When I did sort of start up, I guess, the equivalent of the cherry blossoms for a little while, and had people over to my house, but then I got to be a little too much. So we actually started a convention, which is now, I guess, known as Torpedo Con, that John Dalmalian is running. Admittedly, I haven't been as active in the logistics on it, but John's organizing it this year for the weekend before San Diego. So for those that are wondering, hey, is there going to be something else to do if I come out to San Diego this year? Yes, you can actually stop by Los Angeles first, and if you want to get a preview of comics and comic art that are being brought to San Diego, this is the show where people will do that. So it's going to be a 2-day show this year in the heart of Hollywood at the Hollywood Palladium the weekend before San Diego. So if you're thinking about booking flights, you may want to take a slight detour, come to Los Angeles. There's a lot of great things to see in Los Angeles. You can do a little bit of sightseeing and then head down to San Diego from there. It's not too far of a drive.
Right. So that's on the 16th and 17th, I believe.
I believe that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I saw Ruben mention that. I guess I had Larry Tunn on the show last night, and I don't remember him mentioning the cherry blossom thing during that, but maybe he did. I was too. We were talking about art, and maybe I just glossed that over. But I do every CAF update that I do. I have a list of upcoming shows that are art focused, and I like to mention them. And I left them out just because I figured we were going to be talking about it today. But that's not really a show at the end of the day. But that's the thing is, we're hearing a lot more about collectors doing get-togethers. Fish did a get-together in New Jersey a couple weekends ago. There was a collector group in Rome that had a weekend get-together at a hotel where they rented space. And so I think we're going to, and when I get down to Florida, that's actually one of the things that I want to do is do at least a twice annual get-together at my place, and then maybe even once a year, like on CAF's anniversary, doing something bigger, closer to Orlando. And I think that these things are going to become really important to the hobby. That the socializing that we've been able to do the last couple of years here, we're gonna do more and more in person. And you were a big part of that early on with what you were doing around DC.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a little bit in the COVID days, but I think these types of get-togethers are just, especially where it's informal like this. And for a lot of the cherry blossoms, I invited artists in, and I think that adds a nice other dimension to it. And what I was trying to do with that was, frankly, these artists are always behind a table at a convention, and there's sort of this business sort of relationship set up. I wanted to break down those barriers and just let people get to know these artists as people and allow them to circulate as if you were going to a cocktail party, and that's exactly sort of what we did. And can't always get different folks over there, but I think everybody will remember the Herb Trimpe when Herb came down from New York and interacted with everybody. He was just fantastic, and he brought some stuff down to sell as well. And those are some prize pieces that I was able to get when Herb brought me I think it was G.I. Joe Special Missions #2 complete book to add to the cover that I already had for Mike Zeck, and so I was able to buy that from him. He pulled it out of his collection and said, do you want to buy it? And I was like, how often do you get to do something like that? And somebody comes to your house,
exactly,
says, "Here, would you here's an amazing piece, and it's only for you." So, but yeah, those are definitely some good days, and I hope we'll do more. I know Bashar is doing his shows here on the West Coast, and those were sort of modeled after the East Coast conventions. And very frankly, it was funny because the guys that started the East Coast shows actually had come to my cherry blossoms before they had actually started their shows, and I think part of it was to sort of modeled after this idea of just formalizing these things. It's sort of a natural progression to go from sort of at somebody's house into a more a commercial environment where people can spread out and actually do buying and selling. Because I also felt like that was an important part of these types of get-togethers. Is it gives you a chance to really sort of, people want to do that bartering, they want to do the trading. Give them an environment to do that in, and it's nice to do it at home, but it's also nice to do it in these local conventions as well. So glad to see more comic art conventions, and including the Torpedo Con. And I think it's we tried to make Torpedo small enough but big enough as well to make it worth your while to come out. But it is sort of it's the biggest small show that you're ever going to go to, and I think that's what we try to do with that show, is make it so that it does feel like a small show, but reality is it's big in that it's all the stuff people are bringing out to San Diego, but you get to see it a week before they actually go to San Diego. And so if you don't, those people that didn't want to go to San Diego, if you just go to this show, you can do a lot of the same stuff. And if you can also meet with some of the collectors and other friends that you've got in the area and go out to dinner, I think that creates a lot of the same things that we all loved about San Diego. Not to say there's anything wrong with San Diego, and I'll probably still end up going to San Diego more and more. But I think that this Torpedo Con was sort of a compromise, because it is getting really expensive to go to San Diego, or it was getting very expensive with those hotels. I don't know what they are nowadays, but it costs you
probably hasn't changed much.
Yeah, it's like $5,000 for your trip to San Diego, where if you booked a hotel for $200 in LAX or something like that, and a cheap flight, you could probably come to this show for $500, $600 or something like that, and fly from one coast to the other. So.
Yeah, I mean, I took the last couple of years off before COVID going to San Diego just for that reason. It was always $5,000 roughly for flight, then your hotel, food, and that's before you're buying any artwork. So so I miss San Diego now, because I feel like I haven't been there in 5 years. But yeah, I had after going probably 15 straight years, I just couldn't justify the expense at that point in time, and now. But now I miss it. So here's a question for you. Do you think I could ever get John on the show to do a collector interview with me?
John Beatty?
John Dalmayan.
Oh, John Dalmayan. I wasn't sure which John.
Hey, I'd take John Beatty too. I'll take either one.
Yeah, I think I could talk. Yeah, I think John would definitely do it. John does have a, I don't know how to call it extensive, but he's got some very key pieces in his collection.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily share it very often, but yeah, I'll talk to John and see if you're interested to
Yeah, I
review
mean,
some
I'd love to
of it.
talk to him. I mean, he's been, he- he's been an influential guy in the hobby, and in many ways. And I think that, I mean, I don't know. He did start posting on CAF about a year ago. I don't think he really kept up with it, but he had started, and I thought about it around that time, and then I forgot. He probably because he stopped posting and it wasn't popping up in my list anymore. But yeah, I'd love to chat with him if he'd be open to, maybe just picking 10 pieces from his collection to talk about, and we talk about his interests with in comics and putting on a show like that. I mean, it'd be an interesting chat if he were open to it.
I think so, and I probably should mention, since we are talking about Mike Zeck, Mike has actually started working more with John and Torpedo Comics. They've got right now weekly sort of auctions that they're doing, sort of these live bidding auctions that they're doing. For Mike has done a series of some sketch covers for them, as well as some specific prints that they're actually releasing exclusively through Torpedo. So those fans that are Mike Zeck fans and want to get a piece from him, that's probably the best way, because I think right now Mike's not going to be doing conventions for a while. But if you're interested, there are some new pieces that are coming to market through Torpedo on a weekly basis. So tune into what they're doing over there with John Delmine and that team over there.
I mean, I know I haven't gotten any announcements for that to share on CAF. I'll have to maybe
So
follow their Facebook page or something.
Yeah, I would go to Mike's website, which is MikeZeck.com, and you can see he's been making some weekly updates himself on the new pieces that are going to be released. So take a look at, you can see some of the pieces that have been released, and then on a weekly basis, I know he has been updating some of that. I don't know if he will continue that moving forward, but I'm sure you can also go to Torpedo. I think it's just torpedocomics.com would be my guess. And then you can find out more information about stuff that they're doing there. But they're doing, I think what John and those guys are doing on social media and other things to sort of build an audience and build out. I think both, Mike Zeck and John Beatty will be making appearances through that. And so I'll also mention that John Beatty was going to be here today with me. I had invited him, but he couldn't make it to the exhibit here too. But yeah, I think we could probably get both Johns for you on future shows if you'd like.
I think that'd be great. And if you wanted to be on either one of those with me, I'd be cool with that. Or whatever. If your schedule's free, I know you're pretty busy, but you know them both really well, and that might make for a fun interview, kind of like when we had Ed on.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk a little bit about Ed. I think you mentioned at the beginning of the show of some things that are coming up. So, folks may also know that I work at Prop Store, and as part of Prop Store's offerings, we will incorporate comic book art into what we sell. I think props and costumes was what Prop Store is known most for, but I like to pride the fact that we have a lot of different types of art, including production art, comic book art, and we're trying to expand and offer more of that to you. So I know you think of maybe Heritage and Comic Link as some of those main places to buy comic art, but do tune in for some future Prop Store auctions. You just go to propstore.com for that. But as it relates to Ed Hannigan, we had done the sale on CAF with Lawrence and yourself, and I think it was very successful. And thank you to all those people that participated in that. Lawrence and I looked through Ed's collection a little bit more, and frankly, there were still some amazing pieces still in there. And we just thought that, frankly, the fairest way to offer them to folks might be through auction, because I know some of that stuff just went instantaneously, which is great. But I think we also just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance and maybe a little bit more time to absorb what was going to be coming up. So we've got at least 40 pieces set aside for the upcoming Prop Store auction that's going to be happening in the spring and summertime, which is going to be a huge auction this year. So you'll hear more about that. We'll be announcing more about what's in the sort of final array of things in the May timeframe. But for those folks that were interested in some more Ed Hannigan, especially cover prelims, we're going to have a great selection of those things coming up in that auction. So save your money, because the money is going to be going to Ed, which I think is also great. It's going directly to the creator, and it's going to make a real difference. So I'm really proud to be able to help offer those. And thanks to Lawrence and Heidi and Ed for allowing us to offer those to fans directly.
Yeah, no, Heidi sent me a really nice letter after all the money had been collected and everything. So great people, and Ed's definitely he can use the support, and so can Heidi, and I think that's great. So what I'm sure that I will be running lots of announcements for that for you.
I hope Right, and I'm hoping we can do another, an art preview, not necessarily only
Mhm.
comic art, but we'll do an art preview leading up to that show. Like I said, leading up to the show, leading up to that auction that's going to take in the spring, summertime. So,
Yeah, we should.
yeah, let's target sometime in the June timeframe. That everybody can hear more about all the great things that we've got in there. But just a really nice selection. I'm really excited to be able to talk about some of those items that that we've got for that auction that are comic art related. So. And we'll have comic books too this time around too. So for folks that
Oh,
may not
wow.
know that we do
They're
that.
expanding.
We're expanding. Yeah. I mean, you're going to see Prop Store doing, bigger and better things. And I think for, fans that have collections, I think one thing that we can do that maybe some of the bigger companies don't do is that we can really sort of take a collection and create almost like a custom auction around it. If it's got the right type of content, we'll do anything from animation to toys to other things that frankly all revolve around sort of the love of pop culture and comics and or
Mhm.
movies. And so I think that's the great thing about Prop Store is, yeah, again, we started as sort of the company that sells you the authentic movie props and costumes coming directly from those movies and television shows. But I think as we've expanded as a company, we've learned that to serve the customers that we want is all
Mhm.
about is a little bit of variety. People like toys, they had a fondness for those types of things. And if you consider yourself sort of an ultimate collector, like I like G.I. Joe and I love the artwork, but I also might like an animation cell, or I might like something else to go along with that. I have Snake Eyes costume in my office, so it's pretty awesome to be able to have just different iterations of characters, especially that you love, or series that you love, both in the art world as well as comics and other things, all
Mhm.
around you. And we're trying to evolve as a company a little bit more to be able to provide that to collectors.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing that with you, and well, anything that Prop Store's got going on, I'm always happy to promote it. So,
We appreciate it, Bill. We appreciate it.
so speaking of the Hannigan set, what about anything coming up with Gerhard or Vosberg like we had done last spring and summer? I believe
Uh,
we talked about Vosberg as a potential show
we
sometime in
did, we
early
did. I
summer.
think, yeah, I think there's to give a little bit of a preview. I know Mike is getting ready to do a Lori Lovecraft
Hmm.
book that he's sort of compiling everything. And I think as part of that, we wanted to do a special sale. I think the details on exactly what we'll be releasing, I think we still need to talk more about what that's going to look like and when that's going to
Sure.
be. But I'm happy to help support that. I know that was something that Mike had been in discussions with other folks around also helping with. So happy to contribute to that as I can. And then as it relates to Gerhard, Gerhard just finished, I believe, Becoming Frankenstein is a book that he's been working on with Frank Sirocco, who's been penciling that. And so I think the 6th issue, Gerhard's been doing colors for that. So he just finished that up. So he's finally gotten a break for himself. And I have him right now. As of this morning, was exchanging emails with him. He is going through his art to try to select some pieces. But yeah, we haven't nailed down exactly how many pieces he's able to sort of free up. But I think we do want to do another comic art sale, art fan sale. There also probably will be some pieces coming up in the Prop Store auction as well. That
Oh, great.
before we actually do another CAF sale. So if
Sure.
you're a Cerebus fan out there, you'll probably see some fresh new pieces coming straight from the collection of Gerhard in that. Although I don't know exactly which ones, but I'll probably find out within the coming week or so. But he's, Gerhard's just a great person, and again, being able to support him and help him sell things the way that he wants them to be sold, and also just put just a highlight on just how amazing his work was. It just every piece I see, whether it's just a background page or if it's one that has a big Cerebus on it,
Hmm.
just who knows how they did it for so long at that level of quality. But he always amazes me.
Well, he was one of my favorite interviews that I've done, with a creator. I mean, he was so down to earth and fun, and the thing that I really enjoyed about that was just getting to talk about each piece. I mean, sometimes they would sell quick, and we weren't able to talk about the piece at length, but that was it was just fun getting to hear his opinions on the pieces that we were showing, as well as getting to talk to him a bit about his career before we got to that point. So, I look back on that one because that was a show format that we really experimented on, Chuck, that we had never done anything quite like that before. And it worked so well. And I've used that format for other art sales with creators that I've done since then. But I always remember the Gerhard sale as just being probably the most enjoyable one that I've had the pleasure of doing. And that went so well. And, Gerhard was great to work with. And honestly, I've probably gotten, in the, since that show, I've at least gotten a dozen emails asking me if we're ever doing another one. And I always just say, well, I think they do these once a year. I don't know if we'll be doing them again, but I'm sure you'll hear about it one way or another. So people remember that show. And I can tell you, that's the one show that people come back to me and ask about too. So I'd love to be able to help you guys out if we could do that again.
Yeah, I'm pushing to do that, but it is amazing that as many pages, I don't know how many thousands of pages they created. The fact that Gerhard remembers a story about every single page that he worked on, because he'd spend a day doing each page, and I guess it's like remembering what you did on February 14th, 1989. It's like, how do you remember that? But I guess the artwork sort of gets him to think about it. Oh yeah, I remember having to deal with this challenge on this and how I was going to draw this, and it brings back memories for him, which is just great that a creator can remember all that stuff from way back then.
Exactly. So no, but really, yeah, I'd love to do it. And even if you weren't going to do it, I'd love to promote it. If you're, if you end up doing it a different way through your calf gallery or whatnot. But that was a lot of fun. It really was. And I really do thank you for approaching me to do that, because it really kind of shed a light on me about how I could utilize the platform to do more than just have a talk show, essentially. I mean, that was really early on. I had just started the Dueling Dealers, but I think we just you helped me see that there was other things that we could do on the platform that just weren't chat shows and interviews and and kind of focus pieces on creators. So cool. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's more that we can do. And I always love, and the great thing about even like Prop Store is we try different things from a marketing standpoint of like, things that we haven't done before. Because back in the days, it was all about catalogs. And, I guess we moved into doing some videos here, but even doing like creator interviews and other things to give behind the scenes. We try to do more and more of that stuff. I would just say to the folks that might be watching here, if you've got ideas or you're friends with a creator that's out there that, frankly needs some help, maybe marketing, they have some artwork or other things, feel free to reach out. I know that's what Lawrence had done with the Hannigans. He had just sort of proactively reached out to me. I'm more than happy. I always want to help where I can, especially with artists that have given so much to our hobby. If there's ways that I can help them, through the forums that I'm creating and some of these sales or other things, let me know, and we can brainstorm together if there's ways that we can help them out. I would love to see, benefit auctions. I'd love to, it would be great if we could get multiple creators to sort of create benefits, or we could do more video highlights of some of these creators. So I'm open to doing some of my free time to helping out others. And but just look, also, I don't want to necessarily hear about everybody that might need either help or isn't willing to do something like this. But I think, as you said, anytime we can get creators and put them in the people that may not have had a chance to be in the spotlight, like a Gerhard, this is a great forum. CAF is a great forum to do that. And I, again, appreciate all your work, Bill, and doing these kind of weekly things and creating an audience for this type of content, because we don't, we all look for a chance that's very specific on us, and we're a very specific breed out there. This comic art collector type of person.
Well, trust me, it's an honor for me to get to be able to do this. I never would have thought I would have been in this position, but I've enjoyed the last 2 years immensely, and I'm excited for where it's going to lead. Right at the end of the day, this has been one of the most fun things I've done in the hobby in a long time, and it's helped me realize how much I appreciate being an art collector, as well as being having the opportunity to kind of I don't want to say be an entertainer, but bring content to people who really want it. Like Ruben, he just thanked me for doing an afternoon show. He's been waiting for an afternoon show. So, I think that's great. At the, for me, I really want to try to create a platform that is both educational, but also kind of, checks all the boxes for what we as collectors want to have in the hobby. And I think that, being able to talk more about our passion for comic art collecting and the creators who make the artwork that we love to collect. I want to create more of those opportunities for all of us. And the creators without the creators, we don't have a hobby. So like you said, I want to be able to do more, to be able to help the people who've made, both, all comic fandom, so the thing that it is today that we all love and collect. I mean, I want to be able to do all I can to help them as well. And so this platform has really helped me realize some of those goals. And again, I'm looking forward to working more with you and Lawrence and everybody else who's I can assist through this medium. But
I guess my final plea, I guess, as it relates to this Mike Zeck exhibit, somebody had approached me earlier today that was a comic art collector. They actually showed me a piece, and I could give them some insight as to which exact piece it was, when it was done, et cetera. But they were asking, like, is this Mike Zeck exhibit going to go anywhere after this? And I have been talking with the curator here about some possible things. But I would also say, hey, if you know of museums out there that would be interested in sort of carrying this Mike Zeck exhibit forward, the great thing is we've created things like interview videos with Mike, and we've got like cover galleries, some things I actually didn't show in the video too that you see here live at the exhibit. Happy to sort of package this up and put it on the road, and not necessarily for commercial purposes, but for also educational purposes. So happy to give back. And if there's also folks out there that are interested in sort of have opportunities to create museum exhibits, I'm happy to share some of my experiences having put these together. As we sort of pointed out early on, there are limitations like how much space you have in the gallery to tell a story. And you need to think about it not only as just like, you want to just highlight the great pieces that you have in your collection, or do you want to tell a story, and how do you do that? And what are some of the supplemental types of things that you want to create? And I think the great thing about Ringling College is that we had access to film students and and animators and other things that could put together these materials, frankly, at no cost, and leveraging and getting the students engaged. And I think that was the great thing about this exhibit here. And we'd love to be able to take it on the road if need be, or happy to create something new and different as well. And as you said, I'm involved with the Marvel exhibit and other things like that. These aren't things I'm necessarily getting paid for, but giving my time to it. And too, even with our auctions, that I'm doing with Prop Store, open to creative things that we can do with those things to, because I think even the auctions, and you see it from, whether it's us or Heritage or others, that we're trying as auction houses to give back to fans and other things by giving them content or giving them insights into pieces that they may not get. We're also a forum, not only just a forum for selling things, but for spreading the word about why these things are very cool and why you should own them. So I hopefully using that platform as well, we can reach collectors and tell some interesting stories, even though we're technically an auction house. So I'm happy to do that. I was going to say, if anybody is in Sarasota and wants to come by for the art walk tonight, I will give away, for the first, let's say 5 people that come, I will give you a signed copy of the Punisher #2 here for anybody that comes and asks for one. So that's your incentive if you're in Sarasota to come tonight to this lovely art walk and see some great, amazing artwork. And hopefully I'll get a chance to meet some fellow collectors out here as well. So it's been great to have people floating through and talking to them all day long, but love to see you if you're out there and you're nearby to Sarasota.
Well, if I was down there in Florida today, I would make it a point of going down to see you. But yeah, not until summertime. But again, Chuck, this was a great opportunity for all of us to see the exhibit. Who can't make it, and I really appreciate all the work you put into it. I mean, it's super professional looking. It looks as well laid out and put as the Marvel exhibit, and that there was a lot of money went into that show. But just looking at the way you presented each of the sections, I mean, that's what I would want to see, and you did a great job, and I'm glad they had the space and the opportunity, and again the team to help you put some of the marketing materials together too. I mean, that was fortuitous.
Yeah, I mean, I think the students that participated here, as well as the college, for hosting a great exhibit like this and taking an interest. And I think there are colleges, all over the country and all over the world that do these. And if I would also encourage other people out there, if you have connections to the university, see if they're interested in hosting something, and maybe you've got some things to get started in your own collection. When I've done, this is a collection of only my art, but in the past, and typically with the Marvel exhibit and even the last Mike Zeck show we did at the Cartoon Art Museum, I had to borrow stuff from other collectors to help sort of fill out that story and tell the story that I wanted to tell. And that's a great experience as well, because you get to work with other collectors to do that. Sure. And you'll, hopefully that experience alone will broaden you as an art collector. So I would encourage other folks to do that if you can, and I'm happy to help and give some coaching along the way. If you've never done one of these before, I would love to see more exhibits pop up all across the world.
All right, well, there you go, Chuck. You're volunteering your services. I guarantee you somebody's going to reach out to you.
Yeah, don't take up too much of my time, because my wife, I still need to spend a little bit of time on more than a little bit of time with my wife on the weekends too. But I'm happy to help as I have some free time to give that. I think giving back is something all of us should do in one way or another. And as an art collector, this is one way that we're uniquely positioned to give back. So,
All right. Well, thanks for all that you do, Chuck. And again, whenever there's anything you need me to help you promote, let me know. Especially when the prop store, the spring summer auction gets started. I'd like to, we got to do that PR show, and if there's anything else I can push out for them in advance of that, please let me know. I'd be happy to help out. And again, thanks for everybody for tuning in today. This was a lot of fun, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to do this. And
thanks to all you guys that stayed tuned and listened to my stories for so long. And thanks for tuning in every week. It's a great community that we see out there. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks to you as well. Like I said, it's been a pleasure working with you. So,
yep, you're here, and thanks, Ruben. You were really chatty today. I love it.
Nothing wrong with that, Ruben. There's nothing wrong.
No, not at all. Not at all. We'll do it. We'll have to do more afternoon shows in the future. All right, Chuck. Thanks again. Right. I appreciate it, and have a great time this evening with the